right, so I played that video. Have any of you have ever seen those glasses or the videos with the glasses for colorblind people? They're able to put on these sunglasses and see colors for the first time. Have any of you ever seen a video like that before? A few of you, young people have. I just felt like we weren't going to cry enough, and so I put an emotional video, right after all the testimonies. No, but the reason why I play that video is today we're going to be talking about the 8th and 9th miracle in Matthew chapter 8 and 9. And those miracles that we've been walking through after we've gone through so many, sometimes I feel like it's easy just to read scripture and say, oh yeah, Jesus brought sight back to blind people. He made deaf people hear. He brought people back from the dead. And it's easy just to almost skip over that because we know the stories. But I was hoping that if we watched that little video of just a boy who could see fine, just not colors, and see what an impact it was to see color for the first time, maybe if we just bring that as into the story as well of when Jesus does the miracles. That this was a moment of rejoicing. This was a moment of celebration. These people, the blind people that we're going to look at, the deaf and the mute, that we're going to see here today, they have gone through maybe their whole entire life and never seen anything. Could you imagine the rejoicing and the celebration that takes place whenever Jesus restores their sight? So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 9 today, starting in verse 27. We've got 3 points in the bulletin. And the first point is believe in who he is. It's talking about the reactions to Christ's compassion, which should be our reactions as well. But the first reaction is to believe in who he is. That first word in the bulletin is believe. All right, let's go ahead and go on in Matthew chapter 9, starting in verse 27. And Jesus passed on from there. 2 blind men followed him, crying aloud, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." Now, we'll stop there. And it says here that Jesus was passing on, that he was walking through Galilee, where he's been the last 2 chapters, last 6 weeks of our study here. And he's walking around, and 2 blind men were following him. Now, being the scholars that you are, I think the next question that you're likely going to ask is, how? Well, there were 2 blind men. They were following Jesus somehow, right? We don't know exactly how. Likely, though, what it was is that at this point, Jesus had such a large crowd, such a large following. Remember last week, which might have just been right before then, he just raised a little girl from the dead. And when that happens, crowds tend to come around here. So it was just such a commotion going around Jesus that even blind people were able to follow him at this point. And they themselves were following along, and they were crying aloud. That word crying, it's not just like what many of you are doing right now, just dabbing your eyes and trying to keep it together. I'm looking at you men that they're dabbing your eyes. But no, when it says crying, it's screaming out, wailing on the top of your lungs. Jesus! They're saying, "Son of David, have mercy on us." They're screaming out, trying to get his attention, even though they were obviously probably pretty far away from Jesus. Look what they say, though. Still in verse 27, it says, "Have mercy on us." That word mercy, it means to not receive what you deserve. And so if I go to the courthouse, which I'm not planning on it, don't worry, all right? You don't have to start a new pastor search. But if I went to the courthouse and I got arrested for breaking and entering into a house, then I go to the courthouse and the judge has mercy on me. He's not going to give me the punishment that I deserve. The last few weeks we've been talking about how in that time period, because they didn't know anything about medicine, they didn't know anything about our bodies, and like we know, they thought if you had a disability like being blind, at that point it's because you had sinned. You had done something so awful, so much worse than everybody else, that God had punished them for sinning. And so they see it, they say, "Have mercy on us." They say, we know we deserve this blindness. We know we have sinned. We've done something bad here, which isn't correct, but that's what their thinking was. But they're saying, "Have mercy. Don't give us the very thing that we deserve. Have mercy. Heal our blindness." And then even more significantly, he says, "Son of David." Son of David. That phrase, Son of David, has not been used since Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. Now, I'm sure I preached on Matthew chapter 1 and verse 1 just in the early part of December, so I'm sure you all remember exactly what I said well. If anybody wants to stand up and tell me my points from early December, feel free. Okay, you guys all getting F. No, but back then, whenever we first started the book of Matthew, I said that Matthew had a very specific goal in mind. It was writing to a Jewish audience, and he was going to show that Jesus is their coming king, that he's the Messiah, the coming king that they've been waiting for a really long time. And because he was the coming king, he had to meet two qualifications. He had to be Jewish, because if you're going to be king of the Jews, he had to be Jewish. And then he also had to be the line of a king. And so Matthew 1:1, I don't have it on the screen, but it's real short if you just want to hear it. It says, the book of genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. So right off the bat, right in Matthew 1:1, Matthew lays off his thesis and says, I'm going to show you that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the one you've been waiting for, and he's the son of David. What's significant about that phrase, if we had more time, we could dig into it a little bit more, which we probably will later on in the book of Matthew. But the phrase son of David, more than any other term in the Old Testament, refers to the coming Messiah. It was very clear that the blind men knew exactly who they were seeking, who they were searching after, who they were following, that they thought that this was the Messiah, the one that they had been waiting for. And so they were crying out, Son of David. Don't miss the significance that it took Matthew 9 chapters and 6 months of Sunday morning sermons to get back to the fact that Jesus is the son of David. So for the last 6 months, as we've been walking through the last 9 chapters, Matthew has been building a case. He started it in Matthew 1:1 and said, I'm going to show you this. And then he goes through, and what did he do at the very start? He said the genealogy, because it's important for the king to be lined up to the previous kings. And so he shows us the genealogy. Then he shows us how he is born, because it's important to know how the king was born. And then in chapter 3, it talks about John the Baptist, and he was the herald, the prophesied herald that was going to come before the king. And then in chapter 4, he overcomes temptation. Chapter 5 through 7, he does a Sermon on the Mount, which is really the announcing of the new laws, the new way of life in the kingdom of God. And then in these last 2 chapters, chapter 8 and 9, which we've been in the last 5 weeks here, he's been going around and healing the sick, going around fulfilling prophecy non-stop, and just showing that he was the Messiah, that he is the Christ. So he's been building this, but don't miss the significance that it was blind men that first recognized it. It was blind men. You know that in the Old Testament, there was a lot of different miracles, but there's never a blind man healed in the Old Testament. That was reserved for the Messiah. And after Jesus, the only person that ever got healed from blindness after was the Apostle Paul, and he had that interaction with Jesus as well. And so very much, I think what Jesus is saying is that the blind, just like the physically blind could see Jesus, Jesus is saying, Israel, I'm your king. Take off this spiritual blindness and see me for who I am. Let's keep going on here and see how he responded in verse 28. And when he entered the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said, Do you believe that I am able to do this? They said to him, Yes, Lord. This is a little bit of an interesting interaction, because outside they're screaming, save us, or have mercy on us, son of David. They're screaming, obviously calling him the Messiah, obviously showing that they believed in who he was. But they went inside of a house, and then once they got inside that house, Jesus says, do you believe? That's kind of like, okay, Jesus. Obviously, they believe. Why would a blind person take all that energy and risk the injury and go through all this trouble if they didn't actually believe? Furthermore, I think that Jesus already knows exactly who believes and who isn't. John 10 says that he holds us all in the hands. And so he knows exactly if the blind man believes. And so I don't think it was for Jesus' confirmation. It was for everybody else's. Once again, to say, hey, look, everybody, they believe, and yet they're blind. Let me ask you something. How many miracles did these blind men see Jesus do? Zero. Zero, right? Easy question, all right? I wasn't trying to trick you. Some of you are still not getting it, but we got some coffee out back. Well, you'll get some later. They did not see any of the miracles. I think it's reminiscent in John chapter 20, I believe, whenever Jesus is after his resurrection, he talks to Thomas, and Thomas says, "I'm not going to believe until I see it, until I can put my fingers in the holes." And Jesus says, "Thomas, you believe because you see, but blessed are those who believe and do not see." And so for very much, these blind men are examples too. They didn't see any miracles. They just heard the miracles being reported, and they had enough faith and enough belief and enough hope to trust that God was going to be able to do them, that God didn't forget about them. And that is in the same position as us, because we don't get to see these miracles that Jesus did, but we can still look at them as our examples. And so it says, "Have mercy on us, son of David." And verse 20, when he entered the house, he asked them that question, and they said, "Yes, Lord." Verse 29, then he touched their eyes, saying, "According to your faith, be it done to you." So they declared that they believed. He went out and he touched their eyes. I always just love it. I was thinking about this week that Jesus is all powerful. And sometimes whenever there were certain miracles, that he would just say a word and he could heal somebody from a long distance away, 20 miles away, just by a word, and he has that capability. But so many times he reaches out and he touches them. For the blind man, obviously touch is important, right? Have you ever met a blind person where they feel your face to kind of get to know who you are and what you look like? Touch is important for a blind person, and Jesus knew that, and he reaches out and he touches them. He had the power just to say the word, but he reaches out and he touches them. He says, "According to your faith." That's that faith isn't what causes it. Faith isn't really even the motivation behind it. But faith is the avenue that allows the healing to come. And their eyes were open. Verse 30. And Jesus sternly warned them, "See that no one knows about it." But they went away and spread his fame throughout all that district. So Jesus heals them, and then he does something very interesting. Very interesting. He looks at the people, he looks at the two blind men, and he sternly warns them. That's a sharp rebuke. It's often used as for animals that are huffing and puffing. Like Jesus almost was angry and said, "Hey, don't you tell anybody about that you were healed." Which is, one, I would not want to be sternly rebuked by Jesus. I've been sternly rebuked by my mama, and that was not fun, all right? But yet, how much more would it be by Jesus? But then did you notice exactly what happened almost immediately after? They went out and they started telling people. Now, one, we have to ask ourselves, okay, what was Jesus actually getting at here? Did he want these blind men to just not tell anybody that they could see, right? So as they're walking along the street and they step over a stone because they can see it now, people are saying, "How'd you see that?" I don't know. It's like, I'll go back to be acting like I'm blind here. No, I don't think he was saying be deceptive. Why? Because we just looked at like 8 other miracles, and he doesn't say this to other people. He just raised the girl from the dead, and he didn't tell them, don't say anything. So Jesus wasn't as concerned about the fact that he was a miracle worker. He was sternly warning them not to tell him something else, which is that he is the son of David. Remember, that was the first time. They were the first ones to recognize that, to see that in all of the book of Matthew so far. And so he's saying, hey, don't tell anybody else that you have recognized me as the Messiah, as the son of David. As we're going to see in the next few chapters, he's going to send out his apostles, send out his disciples, and start to spread that message in the way that he wants it to be spread. But right now, he knew what was in the hearts and minds of the men and women in that nation. They were under Roman oppression. They wanted to be free. They wanted to get out of that oppression. And so after, for instance, in a few chapters, we're going to see Jesus feeds 5,000 people. And it says they try to take Jesus away and make him king. And he says, that's not why I came. I came to be a suffering servant. I came for the cross. And so don't start telling people about that I'm the Messiah, because they're not going to listen to the message. I'm not the Messiah that they think that I am. And so he says, no one knows about it, but they went away and spread his fame throughout the district. Which, one, that is a sin. They directly disobeyed Jesus. It's hard for me, though, to be angry at them, because likewise, Jesus now tells us to go and tell everybody about him. And so often I do not tell everybody about him. It's just the exact opposite. Whereas Jesus said, don't tell anybody, and they told everybody because they were changed. We also are changed, and Jesus says, go and tell everybody, but so many times we keep it to ourselves, and so it's hard to be angry. It's easy to relate. Let's keep going on here to our second point, which is marvel at what he can do. Second reaction to Christ's compassion is marvel at what he can do. Speaking of marveling, and I forgot to say it earlier, but it's good to see little Judah here today. That little sweet baby is back there, as we've been praying about and rejoicing over. We can marvel. He's an answer to prayer for a lot of people. Amen. We'll get a chance to hug on that little baby in a little bit. Stay with me first, all right? Verse 32. And as they were going away, behold, remember, pay attention when it says behold. Behold, a demon-oppressed man who was mute was brought to him. And when the demon had been cast out, the mute man spoke. And the crowd marveled, saying, never was anything like this seen in Israel. All right, so as these men were going out, then all of a sudden now there was a demon-oppressed man that was brought to him. It says that he was mute. That word mute can also mean deaf, and so he's probably blind, or excuse me, he's probably deaf and mute. But then he was also demon-oppressed, which it kind of rebukes the idea that some people say whenever there is a disability, whenever there is sickness, certain denominations say it's because you don't have enough faith. Obviously, that's why you got cancer. That's why you got sick. And all these things relates to your faith. But the blind men didn't have a demon. They were just disabled, but this man was. So it really has nothing to do with the spiritual aspect. But this man couldn't hear, couldn't speak, and demon oppressed, and he was brought to him. All the other times when people are performing miracles or miracles are done to them, they're going and seeking after Jesus. Even the blind man, it would have been very hard to follow Jesus as a blind man. They sought after Jesus, but here he was actually brought to him because this demon-oppressed man, this demon inside of him, had wanted nothing to do with Jesus because he knew who Jesus was. But without any fanfare, without any extra details, Matthew just mentioned, and he was cast out. It's almost like an afterthought. It wasn't even hard because it wasn't hard for Jesus, because he is powerful and he is able to do that. And so he just cast out the demon, and the mute man spoke, undoubtedly speaking praises about his Savior. The crowds marveled. They were astonished. They were amazed. They never was anything like this seen in Israel. But look at verse 34. But the Pharisees said, he cast out demons by the prince of demons. We're going to look at this. This comes up again in Matthew chapter 12, where they accuse him once again of performing miracles not by the power of God, but by the power of Satan. And so Matthew chapter 12, when we get there, we'll go through a lot more in detail exactly how Jesus answers that. But for now, we've just looked at, for the last 6 weeks, of Jesus just healing lepers, healing blind, raising up little girls from the dead, calming the seas, casting out demons. He's just constantly doing this, all the while fulfilling prophecy. There is no reason to accuse him of anything wrong, of anything demonic, of anything evil in any way whatsoever. But the Pharisees still found a way. Because the Pharisees didn't care about any of that. They cared about the fact that they were losing power, they were losing control, If Jesus would have become a Pharisee and followed all their rules and just instilled self-righteousness and not actually cared about people's heart, they would have been fine with him doing all of this, but it was the fact that he was going against their power. And so while some of us marvel, some of us say it wasn't God at all. I don't think that for today there's too many of us that would say that obviously whenever God heals somebody, that it's actually demonic that influence that healed them. But so often, in a way, we kind of do the same things whenever we see God move, and God does an amazing work, and God does an amazing act, and he pulls strings together that we never thought could happen, and then we say, man, I got lucky, right? We still accuse, we say it was anything but the power of God. Whenever we see the medical miracle happen where somebody's healed, we say, man, I'm glad they got the right doctor. And I'm glad they got the medical treatment. And yeah, sure, God uses those things. I'm not saying that he doesn't, but at the same time realize that it's God that does all this, not anything else. Let's go down now to our third point, which is to pray for those who do not know him. Pray for those who do not know him. I don't like how I worded that, but I'll get into it in a second here. Verse 35. And Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, for they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Stop there. So meanwhile, as the Pharisees are saying that he's doing it all by the work and the power of demonic activity of Satan, he's going throughout all the cities and all the villages. Cities are ones with walls around them. Villages don't have any walls. They estimate that there's probably about 200 cities and villages in Galilee at that time. So he is just going around constantly, walking throughout all the area, preaching a message that he's preaching the gospel of the kingdom. I think Luke chapter 4 gives us an indication of what he was saying in that. I don't have it on the screen here today, but I'm going to read Luke chapter 4, verses 16 through 21. Luke 4, 16 through 21, to give an indication of what Jesus was talking about when he went through the towns and villages. Luke 4, 16 through 21 says, And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of the sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say, Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. And all spoke well of him and marveled at his gracious words that were coming from his mouth. So Jesus was going into these synagogues all over and saying that I am here to proclaim to the poor, to proclaim to the weak, that this kingdom has come, the kingdom that you have been waiting for so many years, for literally thousands of years. The Messiah has finally come and is finally here. And that's the message that he was proclaiming. I love in verse 36, though. It says, when he saw the crowds, see this frequently whenever Jesus looks at large crowds of people. He becomes emotional. He had compassion for them. That word compassion means to share in the suffering with. To literally, whenever you have compassion on somebody, it's almost as if you say, you are in pain, and so I'm in pain with you. I'm sharing in that right alongside of you. He had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. I said it before, and it's at the very start of every single sermon whenever we put it on there. It says the King has come. And I said in the book of Matthew, it's all about the fact that Jesus is the coming King. One of the most common metaphors that people often miss in the Bible is that shepherd metaphor. It's actually a metaphor for a king and his people. You can read Ezekiel chapter 34. There's a long list. Zechariah chapter 11. There's a long list about these shepherds. And if you read it and you just plainly look at it, you say, no, he's not talking about shepherd. He's talking about a king, because oftentimes kings were viewed as shepherds. And I think very much Jesus is saying these people are without their king. They're harassed and helpless. And he said to his disciples, verse 37, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. So he looks out on this vast crowd. Many of you are farmers or have farmed at some point in your past, and you know that the crop is only as good as you can actually go out and get the fruit, right? If you don't have the time, the energy, the manpower to actually go out and get the fruit, then what good is the harvest? So we've been watching out here. There's a field out here, and they'll bring, just busloads of guys coming on out and picking the watermelons and going out. And why? Because you need laborers. You need people with hands and feet to go out and do the work. And he says the harvest is plentiful. That they were people ready to believe. They were people ready to follow Jesus, if only that they had somebody to go out there and tell them the harvest is plentiful. You know that the harvest is plentiful here in Brooksville. That hasn't changed at all. And in reality, we're often talking about how bad things are getting and how awful, and that there's not as many Christians as there used to be. And it's like, oh, praise the Lord, because that just means there's more harvest out there for us to go out. It shouldn't be hard. We don't have to look for unsaved people anymore, right? Just knock on the door next to you. You'll find them. But did you notice, though, whenever Jesus was talking to his disciples, and he said the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few, he didn't say go out and work harder. He didn't say try really hard. He didn't even say go out and recruit other people yourself. What did he say? Pray. Pray that the Lord would raise them. I think a funny thing would happen if you know your neighbor is unsaved, and you've been praying for them, and I hope you have been praying for your neighbor that's unsaved to get saved. If you start praying instead of saying, Lord, please save them, to Lord, please bring somebody into their life that can lead them to Jesus, start praying that for a while. I think after a little while, you're going to say, wait a minute, I'm somebody. that maybe the Lord might just raise me up as well to be his laborer. Maybe the Lord might raise us up in a special way. I was reading a book here, and I'll close with this. I like the fact that the Stanleys have been doing that for 5 years, praying out at the gathering place there. And they gave me a book. I think it's inspired the New York Prayer Revival, right? There's a story there. In 1857, I believe the year was, there's a man named Jeremiah. And he wasn't a missionary. He wasn't a preacher. He wasn't anything great. He was just a businessman. And that businessman, he eventually did, though, quit his job and just became a lay missionary with the Dutch Reformed right in the middle of New York City. In 1857, if you remember, it was right before the Civil War. Our country was going through a huge turmoil. They were not sure about this upcoming war, what was going to happen, so the banks were shaky at best, and then the economy was shaky at best, and so he said, I'm going to start a prayer meeting. And so at noon, he put up flyers all around, and at noon one day he went down and he started to pray, and he got in there, opened up the door, and nobody was there, so he just got down and started praying by himself. By the end of that hour, 6 people showed up, and he continued to pray. And then they started to do this over and over and over again. And that little 6 people grew from 6 to 30, to 30 to 100 to 100 to 1,000. But within 4 weeks of that happening, all of a sudden there was a major economic crash in America at that time, and the banks started closing. And when that happened, all of a sudden that 1,000 turned into 10,000, and it started to spread throughout the nation. It's estimated that there were 30 million Americans living in 1857. It's estimated out of that revival that grew out of that prayer meeting, 1 million of them got saved. To make it even more personal, if you track it, as I was last night there, that eventually it got out from New York and it made its way all the way over to St. Louis and Chicago. Chicago was where a young man walked in. He was already saved, but he wanted to see what the Lord was doing, and he spent time, and it was D.L. Moody, Chicago. If you didn't know, Pastor Carl, the man who started this church, went to Moody Bible. I wonder how many other connections we have if we go back and trace our family tree, our spiritual family tree, back to a man who said, let's just pray. Let's just pray, Lord. Let's just pray for our nation. Let's just pray for our community. Let's just pray for our families, because that is all that we have. That the Lord would raise up an army that can go out and declare his kingdom. I'm going to invite the band to come up and sing about one more song about our good King. But before they do that, or as they do that, will you please join me in praying to the Lord of the harvest? Every head bowed and every eye closed. Lord, we love you. Lord, we thank you that for whatever reason, even though we didn't deserve it, we didn't earn it, Lord, that you loved us enough to die for us. Lord, and like I said earlier, we can never pay it back. We can never give enough of our life in return of yours, Lord, but let us try. Lord, I do pray that you would raise up laborers here in Brooksville, whether that's with Community Bible Church or with one of the other good churches here in town, Lord. I pray that you would make us stronger, that you would make us one body, Lord, as we try to reach out into the darkness, that we are the city that's set on your hill, like your word talked about, that we are the light, that we are the salt, exactly what you called us to do, Lord. I pray that we would be bold in our confession, but yet loving in our actions. Lord, if there's anyone here today that does not know you, Lord, I pray that they would turn to you. That they would see the compassion that you have, that same compassion that healed the blind, that saved the demonized man, Lord, that they have that same love for you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.